about the story of Lake Tahoe and how tourism is impacting our infrastructure, obviously with a focus on transportation. For those of you that are unfamiliar or maybe unfamiliar, Lake Tahoe sits high atop the Sierra Nevada mountain range between the states of California and Nevada. If you haven't had the good fortune to visit there, I always like to start my presentations with a lovely picture that hopefully rivals the view of the Hawaiian Islands. So hopefully we can compete with you all over there. The Washoe people were the indigenous peoples of the Tahoe region and lived in Tahoe during the summers and would move to the lower elevation valleys during the harsh winters. More recently, in the 1880s and 90s, during the gold rush, during the Comstock rush, white people, for lack of a better term, came and chopped down all the forests to feed the silver and gold mines in Virginia City, obviously leaving a lot of destruction. But once those dried up, Tahoe somewhat recovered, and the forest grew back, and Tahoe became a playground for the wealthy, with steamships and railroads for those to enjoy Tahoe during the summers. Our modern era really begins in 1960 with the 1960 Winter Olympics at Squaw Valley, which is now called Palisades, Tahoe. This brought many people to Tahoe and really put us on the map. This had negative consequences towards the region. In 1939, you can see an aerial shot of the south shore of Tahoe with the Upper Truckee Marsh still intact. At one time, this was the biggest wetland in the entire Sierra Nevada mountain range. Currently, it is home to about 1,500 homes called the Tahoe Keys. And as you can see, they were built right on top of that wetland, which served as the natural filtration system for the lake that protected its famed clarity. This resulted in water pollution reaching our lakes. You can see the big sediment plume there. Stormwater pipes from our transportation and urban infrastructure dumped and can actually continue to dump in some cases, untreated stormwater directly into the lake, as you can see the erosion on the beach there. This leads to a whole host of problems, including loss of lake clarity and growth of algae along our beaches. So all of this led to the creation of my agency in 1969, when the states of California and Nevada came together and created what was the first ever bi-state environmental compact agency in the United States. Our mission is to preserve, restore, and enhance the environment, improve local communities. So we really have both of those aspects there, not just the environment, but also the communities and the economy. And we also serve as the region's metropolitan planning organization. We're one of the smallest MPOs in the nation. A little bit about the watershed. The lake's about 12 miles wide and 22 miles long. The lake's 1,600 feet deep. We have about 55,000 year-round residents. 85% of the land is publicly owned. And we get about $5 billion in the annual economy. Politically, Tahoe, as I said, is split between California and Nevada. We also have 5 counties and 1 incorporated city in the federal government. So as you can imagine, anything that gets done in Tahoe needs to get done with collaboration across jurisdictional boundaries. And as you can see, the watershed is outlined in that squiggly kind of oval shape. The water pollution, traffic, transportation issues, and all the things we're facing don't follow those imaginary lines we drew on the map. So that watershed level collaboration is extremely important. Tahoe is a 4-season outdoor recreation destination, from our world-class ski resorts, mountain biking, and paddling and boating, to just the beauty of the falls and the variety and many miles of hiking trails that we offer. In preparation for this presentation, I went and looked at some of the differences between Hawaii and California in terms of tourism. As I said, we have about 56,000 year-round residents. We get 15 million visitors annually compared to the 10 million visitors that Hawaii had in 2019. While we have some more visitors, your visitor spending is higher, and our tourism economy is about 64% of our jobs. Where these cases differ is during the COVID-19 pandemic. While Hawaii was, for a while there, was cut off from the rest of travelers via airplanes. I did pull this stat that October 29 compared to October 2020, visitation was down 68% on the islands. Our visitation at Tahoe was record highs because everyone that came from California and Nevada and would normally have flown to Hawaii for vacation decided Tahoe was a great place to go. And we don't have the ability to just shut down Tahoe and say no one's allowed in. So we not only had record highs of visitation, our patterns of visitation changed. Where people were going, what they were doing, how they were recreating also changed. So that was a double whammy in terms of the challenges we were dealing with. But our conversations around tourism's impact on our infrastructure goes back before the COVID-19 pandemic. We've long dealt with the impacts of transportation and tourism on our system. You can see this headline about the people wanting to go sled go sled on the snow. Literally just park on our interstate highways, on the shoulder, in the lanes, in the travel lanes, creating extremely dangerous conditions. Over tourism, that's an article from 2019. Over tourism has really become that buzzword at Tahoe to describe the problems that we have. But it wasn't just Tahoe. It's everywhere that's dealing with this, not just the United States. Around the globe, people are dealing with the concept of over-tourism, and no one has quite solved the challenge. The COVID-19 pandemic has definitely brought a lot of those challenges to the surface and made them worse, but I don't think it necessarily created anything that wasn't already going on. A little bit more context to dealing with the challenges we have. We're also part of the Northern California mega region. I circled Tahoe with the red circle there on that map. And the projected increase in population around us within a day's driving distance to Tahoe is really an exponential growth. Just on the California side, by 2060, we're going to have 10.4 million people living within a 3-hour drive of Tahoe. So you can really see that the population pressures around us are changing how our visitation is affected. We also have seasonal visitation patterns, which I'm sure in Hawaii you're all familiar with. Going from left to right, you can see our summer, fall, and winter activity. I think the key is a little hard to read, but 1 dot equals 50 trips to that general vicinity. This is using AirSage cell phone data, so using some of that newest technology and cell phone tracking and very Big Brother-like data to see what those visitation patterns are and understanding where our recreation hotspots are and how those shift over time in order to adjust our transportation system. We don't need to spend a lot of money providing transit to a summer recreation location during the winter when people aren't going there. We do manage our system through 2 mechanisms. Our regional plan is the region's overall land use strategy, and our regional transportation plan is our transportation strategy for the region. And you can see how those look on a map. On the left is our land use, where we have our town centers or the areas in our community where we want to concentrate development, have mixed use, transit-oriented development that includes shopping centers, offices, hotels, housing. And at the same time, our transportation system then connects with those town centers with transit hubs to and from recreation sites around the lake and in and out of the basin, connecting to those nearby urban centers. We further break down our transportation and land use planning through corridor plans. The Tahoe Basin has been split into these 6 distinct corridors, and each one of them has unique transportation needs and challenges, where we're looking at things like paid parking, alternative transportation systems, reservation systems. What do our facilities and recreation facilities look like? And how do we have wayfinding to make sure that people know where to go and get around? A great example of that is along Lake Tahoe's west shore, which is home to Emerald Bay, which is our most photographed location in the Tahoe region. And you can see there on the left, just an example of an average day in that corridor with people parking all over the highway, most of the time over the fog line. And it really just does cause a lot of challenges for management agencies in terms of litter, trash, illegal parking, but also really degrades the visitor experience. And this is also a state highway, so it's used for commuters. It's also used to transport freight and goods. So that has an impact to quality of life and our economy. So what we've done is we've taken that corridor and looked at that whole section of how people go to and from and around. And we also add extra user data on this. This is a heat map from the Strava app that not only shows the highway, but shows the lakeside and the mountainside and what people are doing once they're there. It's not just about getting people to and from a location, but it's understanding how they interact with that location while they're there. And we will go through a process called the visitor experience cycle of planning that whole process when people are anticipating their vacation, they booked their trip to Tahoe 3 months ago, and they're looking up all the tips and top things to do to once they arrive and what they're going to do when they arrive and how you reach them with messaging at the hotel about, hey, don't drive here. It's going to be crowded. Why not take the bus? That experience piece of what they experience while they're actually there, what they experience when they leave, what's their takeaway, and how do they savor that experience? What do they tell their friends about it? What do they remember a year, 2 years from now, and how do they potentially become repeat visitors? I'll skip over that. And when we put all of this together within this corridor, what does it mean? We connect transit, bike, and water ferry to our recreation system, integrating paid parking and reservation systems. And on today's ground, we've got about a 99% auto mode share to this corridor. And our ultimate vision is to shift that and move 60% of the people that typically visit this corridor somewhere in a mode other than their personal vehicle, resulting in roughly 37,000 fewer cars in the corridor every summer month, which would be a massive change to the experience of this corridor and have immense quality of life, environmental, and economic benefits. So as I said, that we've been working on this before COVID started. In 2016, 2017, we really got together as a region and a partnership and decided to tackle over-tourism and sustainable recreation head on and really formed a working group with an all hands, all lands approach. Through 2017 and 2019, we were really defining what our goal was, what the problems were. We developed a charter that outlined how we would work together. We started to identify desired conditions, collective values, and visions. And then COVID-19 happened. And luckily, we had this partnership and working group in place. So we were able to quickly mobilize to deal with the impacts that COVID brought, which included litter, trash, graffiti, illegal campfires, and to the point where we actually at one point had locals protesting at our entry points into the region with pretty poignant messages, not sugarcoating what some of the local sentiment about our visitors were. So those were those challenges that we were dealing with. And how did we respond to it? As I said, we set up these working groups and we've worked through communication and coordination. Actually, we're still going on. Every week, a group of us meets to talk about all of the challenges we're facing and collaboratively brainstorm ideas to solve those. In the beginning, in that first year, we produced 17 executive memos that we sent to the executives in the region to keep them up to date with what was happening with COVID and how we were responding to it. And we were able to unlock over $250,000 of funding towards this response. And working on education and outreach, we have a campaign called Take Care, where we have a website and educational signs, and we've printed over 2,000 signs in the region and really driven a lot of traffic to our website. So here's what some of those solutions look like. We picked up the litter. We expanded our watercraft inspection programs. We had ambassadors going around to our hotspots and talking to people, handing out masks, handing out hand sanitizer. We had these as I said, these take care signs everywhere. We put them at recreation sites. We put them on billboards coming to the region so people got that messaging in those touch points before they came. And we had a lot of videos on social media. So where are we going from here? We had our COVID-19 emergency response as we're coming through this next phase of COVID and whatever that future holds for us. We're looking at the bigger picture and we need to identify how our visitation can be more sustainable. So we're diving in again on that vision setting, action planning, and identifying management strategies, funding, and monitoring towards making a more sustainable recreation vision. Sorry, a little bit repetitive, but yeah, we're working on a shared vision, an organizational structure to make it all happen, a new economic model for our tourism industry, developing strategies to influence behavior, and being innovative about all of it. I was actually really impressed while doing research for this presentation. Some of the destination management strategies and action plans that you all have in Hawaii were actually very inspirational in a lot of what we want to do in terms of our infrastructure, our visitor management, and our communities. Leaving you with a few last things, equitable access is obviously going to be a major factor in this. We have many underserved populations within our community, but also underserved populations in that nearby urban area that we want to get out and enjoying the nature. but providing them the tools and knowledge and know-how in order to do that safely and minimizing their impacts. Climate change is also a major factor. This last fall, we suffered the Caldor fire, which burned over 100,000 acres in total and about 12,000 acres within the Tahoe Basin, resulting in the entire South Shore, including myself, to be evacuated for over a week because of this fire. We were lucky, at least in the Tahoe Basin, to not lose any structures, but climate change has really been knocking on our door, and it's not something that's in the future, it's something that's now. Heat and extreme heat affects our visitation. When we have an extreme heat day in Sacramento, just to our west, on a typical, compared to a 65-degree day, a 100-degree day equals a doubling in traffic over US Highway 50 and Echo Summit into our region. So we can start to predict, if we know that there's a heat wave coming, our management agencies can prepare for more recreation visitors and deploy mitigation strategies to address that. Our ski seasons are getting shorter, causing potential losses in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And extreme weather is threatening our transportation infrastructure, just as you heard in the opening keynote this morning. And then finally, we're looking to electrify everything. We just had our first electric ski boats installed in the lake this year. We've got electric transit, electric rideshare, electric bikes. We're really trying to electrify everything and then build adaptation towards resiliency within our region. So the takeaways from my presentation today that I hope you have is science-based decision-making is at the core of everything we do. We look to have a collective impact and a holistic planning approach across the watershed at a watershed level. We want to develop an ethos of stewardship for our visitors to take care of the place they are recreating and visiting. And then climate change is impacting all aspects of our tourism. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Stuart.
Thank you. Here we go. Thank you, Devin. Let's see. Hopefully we can, Alexandra, have you been able to pull up your presentation? They just informed me. Oh, actually it started screen sharing. There we go. We're in business. Thank you, Devin. Go ahead, Alexandra. Are you there?
Sorry, folks, I'm talking to myself. All right, let's get this going. Okay, so today I'm going to cover California State Park System and sustainable tourism, equitable access and community engagement, partnering as a principle, addressing climate change, and of course, the sustainable design and park infrastructure. State parks has a dual mission, of natural and cultural resource preservation, along with providing opportunities for high quality recreation. The state park system is one of the largest park systems in the world, second only to the 400 units of the national park system. Our properties span the state and provide a variety of unique and outstanding visitor experiences. And as you can see, nearly out of 179 park units, nearly one half of our park units are along the coast, making climate change and sea level rise a very important considerations that we'll discuss a bit later in the presentation. State parks is in a unique period, and responding to the last decade of external review and analysis and internal adaptation and reinventing ourselves to be more responsive to our diverse and expanding population of California. Although we have a time-honored history as a department that serves over 68 million visitors annually and distributes millions of dollars in grant funding to local and regional parks, we recognize the need to do better at addressing issues of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, as well as climate change, and a need to better steward and coordinate with our vast diversity of partners and constituents. As a result of these concerns, we initiated a strategic planning process to help guide us through the next 5 years. Sorry about that. The process started in January 2020 and built upon the momentum of the Parks Forward and Transformation efforts from 2017, with intent to craft a strategic plan that represents our state's incredible diversity across the land, history, cultural, and people. This plan sets the trajectory for our department and includes the divisions of boating and waterways, off-highway motor vehicle recreation, and Office of Historic Preservation for the next 5 years. Development involves several key department stakeholders in an iterative, co-creative engagement process that included 120 employee work group representing all levels, geographic regions, and program areas, a core team, a partner and stakeholder advisory committee, executive staff, and our commissions. The draft plan consists of several critical and interrelated components, including our mission, vision, core values, themes, goals, objectives, and an implementation plan, which is set to launch this summer. The implementation plan will be carried out over the next 5 years and focuses on projects that support the goals, project management tools that track progress, milestones, risks, and budgets for each project will be used to foster accountability. As many public agencies experience, the value of popularity of outdoor spaces was never more obvious than during the recent public health crisis. Through the increase in visitation and demand for access, our internal and external assessments, including our transformation effort, a clear need was identified to be more attentive and responsive to underserved and underrepresented communities. Oh, I'm going too fast. As shown is this graphic from our new Path Forward strategic plan. The department's focus is weighted towards implementing these values, including sustainability. All aspects of implementation will occur through the lens of fundamental principles that include justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, access for all, and collaboration with a full spectrum of partners. To help reach this goal, a variety of programming has been initiated. Looking at our pass and reservation programs was a good place to explore how we could increase access. And we're able to develop a few programs to help, such as the Library Pass program, which will be initiated in April, where we're providing passes in our libraries to be checked out by anyone who is interested. Our 4th grade Adventure Pass program, providing passes to every 4th grade student and their family, and partnerships with CalWorks to provide passes to seniors and individuals with lower incomes. Also, with the Relevancy and History program, we're partnering with the UC and CSU campuses to ensure the latest in cultural scholarship and educational practices are being developed and implemented in our educational programs. To enhance our community engagement, we've begun to develop community engagement staff and programming, reaching out and including local communities in the development and participation of park programming. Some examples of this is the Promotores program to reach into local Hispanic community and the urban camping and campfire programs, as well as expanding park planning programs to include more public engagement. The Re-Examining Our Past program systematically addresses contested place names, monuments, and educational programming, including Native American land acknowledgements and multicultural heritage recognition, as well as visitor use management studies, working with universities to explore cutting-edge visitor outreach and survey techniques aimed to fully engage underserved communities where they live. Partnering is a key principle that has been developed through the department's transformation effort and has been to be better stewards of our partners. The Path Forward strategic plan reflects a commitment to continuing our work together with our stakeholders, partners, and the public on a strong path for a future of our California parks. We have a variety of partnerships that help guide our development of policies, as well as provide essential services and programs to our visitors. There is coordination in planning, infrastructure, climate change adaptation with interagency coordination with our federal, state, and local agencies. And we have similar approaches with our private and park partners, such as NGOs, environmental and recreational user stakeholders, private working landowners, park cooperating associations, concessionaires, business partners, and nonprofits that all help us promote and manage our park properties and programs. As Stuart mentioned, outdoor recreation tourism is a large contributor to California's economy. Having the largest land holdings in the state, California State Parks provides many resources to our local and out-of-state tourists. We're striving for sustainable tourism by ensuring that travel for outdoor recreation is positive for both tourists and local communities. To help create a sustainable visitor support base, we're focusing on our programs and projects to be economically feasible, environmentally sound, socially and culturally equitable, all of which create sustainable business practices. As stated above, we serve 68 million visitors annually, which result in about $4.32 billion per year in park-related expenditures. Only about 12% of our visitors are non-residents. However, they equate to about $1.6 billion annually. Knowing this economic impact to local communities makes it essential that we provide for sustainable park access, focusing on improvements to local tourism as well as out of state, while continuing to work towards preservation of these properties for future generations. To assist in this effort, we rely on support from our patrons and look to ways to increase the support base and enhance opportunities to contribute. This can be done through point-of-sale fundraising, maximizing donation, co-marketing, such as with Lowe's Coronado Resort by our Silver Strand State Beach, where customers can contribute to the ongoing management of the beach, co-management opportunities, such as at Mendocino Areas Park Association, which helps to manage and operate the Mendocino's Headland State Parks. One of the key issues addressing state parks as well as the planet are the effects of climate change. As was previously mentioned, State Parks owns and manages about 370 miles of the 840 of California's coastline. These properties are a huge asset for both California residents and millions of tourists. Thus, we developed our sea level rise strategy. The Sea Level Rise document is a result of a multidisciplinary team, of which I was a member, that worked over the past 3 years. The team made great effort to gather and assess existing and emerging scholarships, external and other agency efforts, including new and emerging strategies and practices as a baseline for our own state parks proactive approach. The adaptation strategy provides a framework for state parks to address coastal flooding and sea level rise using a proactive approach aligned with the latest statewide policy and guidance. It identifies department-wide guiding principles and function-specific actions needed to adapt to changing conditions that align actions internally, and promotes increased integration of multidisciplinary objectives through project development and planning processes, through the creation of 13 decision support tools that will assist staff in building best practices into future operations of coastal park units. As part of the budget's climate resiliency package, state parks received a one-time allocation of $11.5 million to initially implement the sea level rise strategies. The funding categories will include the development of the strategy's 13 decision support tools, the implementation of coastal resiliency projects with a focus on demonstrating replicable restoration and adaptation actions. And this can include both new projects with a focus on restoration, as well as projects that have been under development that can apply modified approaches. State Parks has already initiated the following actions by looking to hire limited term staffing and contracts to develop support tools, assist with project management, and implement key actions identified in the strategy, and develop the development of criteria to select guide development priority coastal resiliency projects. With the final budget act adopted in late September, these are still early days in the terms of implementation, but we're looking forward to how the impacts will be beneficial. In addition, addressing the current and future impacts of climate change requires a critical look at improving and adapting our park infrastructure. First, I'll mention that State Parks takes great effort in the design, siting, construction, and maintenance of all facilities and infrastructure in state parks. Our department's design professionals and consultants have worked to adapt our aesthetic and green design principles to the changing environment. These principles were not only to ensure that all new construction of necessary infrastructure, support, and visitors serving facilities meet these high standards, but we consider and balance protecting the integrity of the significant natural and cultural resources that allow us to meet our department's mission to provide both recreational access and use with resource preservation. Clearly, these principles promote forward-thinking design, including the embrace of sustainable goals and new technologies, but to do so in a practical approach in consideration of our mission. The approach underlines all of our design decisions. In addition, the state of California has incorporated green electric vehicle standards into our state building codes. These building code upgrades are renowned nationally as trend-setting for planning and implementing electric vehicle infrastructure throughout the state. The state's major utility companies have also been mandated through AB 1083 to provide electric vehicle infrastructure at parks and beaches. This includes state and local parks for both fleet and public use. The state is currently mandating for electrifying our fleet into the future. These utility companies have been directed to partner with state parks on the electric vehicle implementation goals. These directives currently call for utility companies to assist in installation of over 200 electric vehicle station ports by April 2023. State Parks is currently assessing priority locations for the first round of mandated EV station implementation, and sites in more than 80 state parks, park units are being considered, with 30 plus of those being coastal units. In addition, we're working with EV planning consultants, advocates, and private and nonprofit entities to develop costs and feasibility of statewide EV implementation plans, leveraging existing and emerging networks, products, efforts for electric vehicle infrastructure and innovation, and identify and reach out to potential partners in the EV infrastructure industry, emerging industry with constant evolving technology and products. State Parks needs to have flexibility in adapting to this trend and advancements. So California State Parks is a major contributor to sustainable tourism statewide. Billions of dollars of revenue benefit both the state agencies and hundreds of local communities. State Parks is proactive in planning for and addressing the current and potential impacts of climate change to this inherent legacy in resource preservation and recreational opportunity. The department is committed and has illustrated its clear priorities through its new Path Forward strategic plan toward being an agent for access for all Californians and its non-resident visitors. So with that, I appreciate the invite to share some of our insights on providing for sustainable outdoor recreation opportunities and management considerations. And thank you for your attention and patience. And I'll turn it back over to our moderator, Stuart.
Thank you, Alexandra, and I apologize again for the technical difficulties. And thank you very much for all the questions. We have staff available that are actually tabulating the questions, and after John's presentation, we will address those. So appreciate your patience. And now we're going to John DeFries. And John was appointed as president and CEO of the Hawaii Tourism Authority on September 16, 2020. HTA responsible for strategically managing its support of the tourism industry. Its mission is to manage tourism in a sustainable way, consistent with the economic goals, cultural values, preservation of natural resources, community desires, and visitor industry needs. John was born in Waikiki, raised by elders steeped in Hawaiian culture. He has more than 40 years of professional experience in tourism and resort development industries. It is my pleasure to introduce John.
Stuart, thank you so much. Welcome all to this extremely interesting program. I've been asked to provide a 10-minute overview that hopefully will frame a rigorous Q&A segment. As Stuart alluded to, our mission at the Tourism Authority is spelled out here, and as you can imagine, is quite a delicate balancing act, and becoming increasingly more important given everything that we have experienced over the last 2 years. If you just think about the journey of any visitor arriving into Hawaii, you land at a state airport operated under federal auspices. You depart the airport, you're on a state highway, you're on a county road, you end up checking into private land ownership at a resort or hotel, and the next morning you're at a county beach or a state trail. And so essentially, in order for us to complete our assignment and fulfill our mission, it requires us to convene and collaborate with all these various jurisdictions, whether they be county agencies or agencies of the state of Hawaii. As Stuart pointed out in the introduction, I was born and raised in Waikiki, and I'll focus on Waikiki for a second. That yellow arrow points to where our home was, 2 blocks from the ocean, and you can see the iconic landmark of Diamond Head in the distance. I call your attention to the bottom left-hand corner where you see this pink hotel. Those of you that have been to the islands can readily identify that as the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. Now, when I was, capture this view in your minds, but when I was 6 years old, this is what Waikiki looked like. And that same pink hotel that you see in the bottom left-hand corner. And what you see is a relatively residential community, somewhat sleepy in nature. And one of the things we grew up with in my neighborhood and certainly within my family was a certain hierarchy of understanding about Waikiki Beach. Number one, for our family and our neighbors, it was a source of food. We came here, we fished every weekend, and what we caught, we consumed and we shared it with the neighbors. We also understood it to be a source of medicine. Elders in my family understood how to prepare certain seaweeds and certain sea urchins to make sure that some of the medicinal needs of the family were being fulfilled. And then the third thing that was important was that it was a place of recreation and a healthy lifestyle. Now, while I have this image up, the one thing we did not have back then were destination management action plans, which I will get into shortly. Basically, that is a process adopted by HTA that engages the community and invites the community into a discussion, into a debate on the most suitable model of tourism that is congruent with our particular island or our particular community. And had that process been there, one of the things that they would have learned from my uncles, my aunties, my neighbors, is an understanding of the tidal patterns, the ocean tidal patterns, as well as the subterranean flow of fresh water that comes out of the valleys that you cannot see off screen that would be up to your left. And the fact that these patterns would merge along Waikiki Beach, that sensitivity and that awareness did not come from my family members because they were scholars, but because they were fishermen. And they understood these kinds of natural patterns and the importance of it. They understood why certain kinds of seaweed grew at certain places along this coastline because of the infusion of fresh water into the ocean. My great-grandfather, if you go back 3 generations, early on expressed a real concern about the fact that the hotels were going vertical too close to the ocean without the benefit of understanding in depth what these tidal patterns and subterranean flows would eventually do. And now that you and I are faced with climate change and sea level rise, some of that information could have proved to be extremely valuable in the way Waikiki ultimately was designed. As you can see along the coastline, a green belt at one time that came well into the resort area. And you see what's left of it out in the distance. The sleepy neighborhood grew up to be a phenomenal urban resort setting. And believe me, as a child, I enjoyed Waikiki. Today, as an adult, Waikiki is still home in many respects, and it is doing exactly what it was designed to do, which was to be the hub of our economic engine. Along the way, local residents, as been pointed out in previous presentations, are having to contend with the added congestion and infrastructure issues, a lot of which is being focused on in this conference and webinar today. Let me take you back to calendar year 2019, because for Hawaii tourism, it was a banner year. It was the first time Hawaii had surpassed in annual visitor arrivals the threshold of 10 million visitors, or roughly 10,400,000 visitors. Here you can see the economic impact indicators, right? 17.7 billion in visitor expenditures, which generated 2.2 billion in state taxes, of which just over 600 million was collected in transient accommodation tax. During that year, HTA's funding was at 79 million annually that came out of the transient accommodation tax, and 16.5 for us to operate and market the Hawaii Convention Center So if you bundle those two numbers together, 95.5 was allocated automatically to HTA out of that 600 plus million. Now, if you look at that number, 95.5, and the $2.2 billion state tax revenue generation, essentially for every dollar the state was investing in Hawaii tourism, it was getting the equivalent of $20 back in return. Now, clearly, I'm not trying to assert that that single dollar did this all on its own. The private sector coalesces around the direction and the branding that we are responsible for at HTA, and collectively, we as a partnership of stakeholders are able to generate that kind of economic output. And then the pandemic hit, March of 2020. And the economic collapse begins, the beach empties, restaurants closed. We all know what happened globally in that. But for the Kama'aina, that term Kama'aina, for those of you that may not be familiar, refers to, it literally means child of the land. And it's referencing those of us that live here, but not confined to just those of Hawaiian ancestry. We have the joy of living in a very diverse, multi-ethnic community. So the term Kama'aina transcends any ethnic group in particular. Nonetheless, there was a feeling of euphoria almost, as if we've got our islands back. We got the uncrowded beaches back. We lost the traffic congestion. And frankly, I can remember being on Kalakaua Avenue one evening at 9:30, and I could not see a moving vehicle in either direction. Felt like a movie set. Frankly, it felt a little eerie. The next morning, I was on this beach, and I was the only person on the beach. So that feeling of euphoria, I get it. I understand it. I'm Kama'aina. But what I also knew as a visitor industry leader is that this type of economic collapse is going to inflict a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And granted, in the first months and year, the federal subsidies helped to cushion that blow. But nonetheless, those of us in business and in the industry were increasingly more concerned about the thousands of families that were being adversely impacted. During that calendar year of 2019, while visitor arrivals were reaching an all-time high, the staff of the Hawaii Tourism Authority embarked at the direction of its board, and this prior to my arrival at HTA, on a process referred to as Destination Management Action Plans. During that calendar year 2019, staff and planning teams went into each of the islands, into the various communities, to start listening to the community about its concerns, about the benefits that tourism was providing. And out of that came a process that is known as DMAPs, Destination Management Action Plans. Today, there is a plan for every island. You see 4 such plans on your screen right now. The reference to Maui Nui is to include the island of Maui, the island of Molokai, and the island of Lanai. So in these 4 publications, which by the way, you can access on the Hawaii Tourism Authority website, all of the islands of our state are covered. And this explains why these plans were so important. It was a time to reset and rebuild. It was a time to collaborate with our counties and communities, stakeholders across, and start to improve upon and develop new tourism products and offerings, and establish a better process to manage the areas and sites that were concerned. In these DMAPs are hotspots where daily, weekly, monthly, there are areas of friction, there's over congestion, there's real concern in each of the communities about the adverse impact it may be having in natural settings as well. So those hotspots have been identified, the priorities have been identified, and as well as the action steps to be taken each year over the next 3 years. It's a 3-year plan where the priorities are laid out, the lead agencies that are responsible for it. And again, let me emphasize one thing. These are not HTA plans. These are not plans of the Hawaii Tourism Authority. These are plans that actually belong to the people of these respective communities. As an example, I'll show you the steering committee on Oahu. And while these beautiful faces might not mean much to most of you, what I do want to emphasize is the diversity in this group. In this group, you have a deputy director from the Department of Land and Natural Resources. You have representatives of the city and county of Honolulu. You have the president of an attraction company. You have a hotel general manager and a gentleman that owns roughly 28 hotels between Hawaii and the West Coast. The importance of this group in every committee that was worked with and organized is to get a group of people that are extremely diverse, that bring unique perspectives, and that you can presume do not agree totally on each other's perspective. Once you bring that diversity together, what's increasingly, or what's paramount, I should say, is the ability to sit in the same room and conduct a civil and constructive conversation that is built on a foundation of having mutual respect and trust. You don't get there overnight, but you do get there if these meetings are facilitated properly. I would like to highlight the work of one of our staff people, Caroline Anderson, who's our director of planning, whose responsibility it was to organize and basically facilitate these groups. Again, keep in mind, every island had its own steering committee. Once the steering committee put the framework in place of priorities, of hotspots, of draft action plans, then it enabled the committee to now take it out to the community at large to then facilitate a broader conversation about what the final action plan should look like. This will give you an example of what you'll find if you get into these plans. And I know some of you have already done so. I'd encourage all of you who are interested to access the plans that are on our website. This will give you an idea of air seas, right? When you're in an island state, you depend on air capacity. And this will give you a sense of the month of March, calendar year 2019, 2021, and 2022. You see the comparison between this March and pre-pandemic March, and that in total we're down 3%. But in the domestic market, we were up 23%, and basically we've been able to achieve certain outcomes in the absence of an international market, our primary international market being Japan. Now that's about to reverse itself with the reduction and elimination of certain restrictions for the Japan traveler who comes to Hawaii and then can return without the kinds of quarantine requirements that were once there. Let me say too that the destination management action planning process got us to start thinking about a tourism model that we refer to as a regenerative tourism model. Now here you see the 4 pillars of the Hawaii Tourism Strategic Plan, which was adopted by the board in January of 2020, or after that pre-pandemic banner year in 2019. The 4 pillars are essential to our work. It represents a broader awareness, a higher consciousness about how we should be looking at tourism going forward. And whatever differences we might have, whatever debates we might have today, I'll tell you where we don't have a debate. If I said to the people of Hawaii, in 3 generations, would you like to see the natural resource base of Hawaii at a higher level, at a more resilient level than it is today? The vote would be unanimous in support. If I said, would you like to see the Hawaiian language and traditional practices and the Hawaiian culture in totality flourishing at a greater degree 3 generations from now than it does today? Again, more than likely, the vote would be unanimous in support. And if I said, do you want to see the fabric of our multi-ethnic community, as diverse ethnically as we are, held together by the spirit of aloha? Do you want to see that fabric more resilient and stronger than it is today, 3 generations from now? Again, I have no doubt that the vote would be unanimous. All of these 3 initial pillars are just critical to our brand strategy and the messages that we send out globally and will continue to send out. And so the reason I believe we can see 3 generations from now is because that's where everybody's great-grandchildren live. And all we really want for that generation is to have a foundation upon which to create and design the pathways to a quality of life that it chooses to have and that it chooses to put forth for the 3 generations that will follow them. This sums up our challenge and our work. In a macro sense, it is supported by the Sustainable Development Goals ratified by the United Nations in September of 2015. For us as an industry, comes the challenge about how tourism begins to drive the kinds of metrics that we would like to see in most, if not all, of these 17 SDGs. And along the way, begin to view tourism as a driver of economic diversity going forward, as opposed to the antithesis. In April 2019, the governor, pictured there in the middle, is surrounded by the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. April 2019, the state of Hawaii accepted an invitation from the United Nations to establish Hawaii as a local 23 islands hub. This enables us provides us with a framework to deal with the challenges and opportunities that we have in sustainability, in conservation, in environmental protection, in economic growth. Hawaii Green Growth is the backbone organization for what is known as the Aloha Plus Challenge. This was adopted in July of 2014. Specific goals in clean energy, local food production, natural resource management, solid waste management, the evolution of smart, sustainable communities, and workforce development. Specific goals have been set for the state of Hawaii to achieve by 2030. Again, this was adopted pre-pandemic in July of 2014. Has the pandemic affected our ability to achieve these goals? Probably, but we have not taken our eye off of the work that we have to achieve by then. I'd also like to point out the Aina Aloha Economic Futures. 14 co-authors drafted a declaration. Prior to my arrival at HTA, the board saw fit to become a signatory to the Aina Aloha Economic Futures Declaration, which provides one more avenue for us to reach the community with an emphasis on these 4 Hawaiian values that you see here. The intent being to merge the best of indigenous knowledge with the best of modern science and technology. Native Hawaiians descend from a culture. You don't have 400 names for clouds or more than 300 names for rain and not understand the climate. And we often ignore that knowledge that is accrued over a millennia that needs to be brought forth and made relevant as we merge that with the best of contemporary science and research. And I close with this. This is one of the hot spots on Hawaii Island. It's Waipio Valley. 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, the mayor of the island decided that they needed to close the access road because of a destabilized face, a shelf that is over the access road with falling debris and falling rocks. I want to go back to a lesson I learned here, which I take very seriously and something I applied to tourism. About every 10 years, this valley floods. Excessive amounts of water flow into the valley, and these crops get wiped out, the roadways get wiped out, private homes and all of that. And it happens just about every 10 years. And so I happened to be in there working on a project about 28 years ago, 25 years ago, and such a flood happened. And it's amazing how the community comes together to rebuild. And so every time when that happened 28 years ago, everybody got fixated on managing the flow of water on the ridgeline. We got to stop the water. We got to stop the water from coming in and inundating the valley. And I happened to be seated next to a Hawaiian woman, an elder. And she said to me, John, the water is a gift. The water is a gift. You know, the water is not the problem. The problem is we don't have enough acreage under cultivation. Because if we had more acreage under cultivation, we would have to channelize the water and manage it. And the reason I end my presentation on this story is it reminds me of the challenges we face at HTA. If we do not become much more effective with new systems, with new public policies, with new programs to better manage the flow of visitors once they arrive into our state, into our valleys, just like the floods of Waipio Valley, it can be a destructive force. Conversely, if we do manage it correctly and channelize the flow of visitors so that their experience is enhanced and the lifestyle experience of our Kama'aina residents are also enhanced, then the flow of visitors becomes one of the gifts to our islands. And I think of that woman every day because her wisdom transcends this valley and is affecting my thought process daily. In Hawaii, the cultural value, the cultural virtue is called malama, which means to protect, to care for, to nurture. It is the organizing principle for our work at the Hawaii Tourism Authority. And at the essence of destination management action planning and destination management, for many of us, is really about caring for our home. In Malama Ku'uhome, or caring for my beloved home, it is a call to action in a Kama'aina way of life that we will perpetuate. And with that, I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you, Stuart.
I'm on mute again. Thank you very much, John. We're gonna go back to, I believe, Devin. So he will have an opportunity to answer some questions, and then we'll go to Alexandra and then John.
I'm here, but I don't see the questions that you want me to answer.
Let's see. Let me see. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. This is from Brian Goodman. What plans are there to make cycling safer around Emerald Bay and other areas where designated bike lanes aren't available? Areas where people parking across the fog line can be an issue.
Yeah, at Tahoe, we have many plans for bike trails. We've built in the last decade or so dozens and dozens of miles of bike trails. And right now, we actually are currently undergoing a feasibility study to construct a bike trail around Emerald Bay. Our goal is to create what's called the Tahoe Trail, which is a continuous Class 1 bicycle trail all the way around the lake, so roughly 75 miles. And all of the safety enhancements that come with that. But it's not just about building the bike trails for us. It's about making sure that those bike trails are connected to transit, connected to the recreation sites, connected to the jobs where people want to go. And we've also had a lot of success plowing our bike trails in the winter, which is a new thing that we've done the last 5 or 6 years. And we see when we plow trails during the winter, those trails continue to get high use, where those people normally would have been walking in the highway or riding in the highway during the winter. So more trails is always a good thing. We're always working towards more trails and making sure that those trails connect to the bigger system.
Thank you, Devin. Let's see. I'd like to ask all the presenters if they've encountered resistance or feet dragging or otherwise weak links in the chain for needed partners. And what have they done to overcome to get the participation they need?
I'm happy to take the first crack at that with just kind of a simple
Sure.
yes.
And then we'll go to Alexandra and then John.
Yes, absolutely. We have. I think there's a lot of people who, when you think of the word sustainable tourism or sustainable recreation or regenerative tourism, whatever you want to call it, 25% of people think it means you're making up an excuse and a buzzword to allow for more tourists. 25% of people think that it means you want less tourists and that's going to hurt their business, and then a whole spectrum in between. So I think one of the things that was very important to us establishing the partnerships that we have now is getting everyone on the same page in terms of a shared understanding of what we mean when we say sustainable tourism. What are we talking about? What are those data points that are important? What are getting everyone on a common base of understanding so you're all coming from the same place in order to have those conversations. It's not going to change people's minds, but if you're coming from that shared understanding, you can start to have conversations in a productive manner instead of talking past each other.
Alexandra?
Can I confirm, did you say on that partners might be dragging their feet?
Yes.
So actually for us, I think we're getting a lot of pressure from our partners. We've had some new legislation over the last few years to help enhance our partnership opportunities. And so we are hearing a lot from potential partners. They really want to help state parks. They really want to keep parks open. They recognize the benefit. And so for us, I think the challenge is being able to provide some, opportunities for partnerships that are consistent with state processes and contracting laws. And so just working through that process can always take some time. But I think for us, we get a lot of requests from organizations that want to find ways to help support state parks and help us be successful. So we're pretty lucky in that respect.
Thank you, Alexandra and John.
I'm sorry, Stuart. You want to repeat the question, or should I get a question off the chat?
Let's see. Let me see if I can pull that up again. Let's see. I'd like to ask all presenters if they've encountered resistance or feet dragging or otherwise weak links in the chain from needed partners, and what have they done to overcome them to get the participation they need?
You know, every agency, every partner, every stakeholder that we need, and I have to include those that own our hotels and resorts, transportation companies, all of them together, right? I think we have to recognize that the whole system has been injured. You cannot go through 2 years of what we've been through and the sporadic stop, go, restart, stop, right? All of that. And so we have not completely healed from that, whether we're in the private sector or the public sector, number one. And so I'm very empathetic to that aspect. I was speaking to a hotel general manager who is short 135 staff people, or about a third of his, right? So my point being that that I believe our partners, our government agencies are doing the best they can and responding as well as they can at this time while they're trying to heal from this, knockout punch that we've had to take. So to date, and frankly, Department of Transportation and Mr. Sniffen kind of heads the list of one of the more proactive people that we are privileged to work with. But I'm not about to chastise or criticize anybody's rate of response, because again, I believe that the people that we work with, number one, this is their home. Number two, they understand the concept of Malama. This isn't about just our business profession. It's not about the recovery of tourism. It is about utilizing our professional responsibilities to essentially Malama Ku'uhome, or care for our home. So whatever resistance we have experienced, whatever delays we have experienced, I appreciate it in the context of the fact that we're still healing from being injured, and continue to look for us to become much more efficient and focused on the kinds of common outcomes that we're committed to as part of our destination management action plan. Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you. We do have some time here. There is a 30-minute break. John, did you see another question that you wanted to answer?
There is one here about, for narrowing winding roads, does right sizing the roadway, structural depth and radii for sustainable tourism help to bring the roadways to desired truck tonnage and size limits, or is it perhaps desirable to incentivize right-sized trucks for some roads? I think that the answer to that actually doesn't belong to John DeFries. It actually, or Hawaii Tourism Authority. In the spirit of DMAPS, it belongs to the community. And I think what you will see, my sense is there's going to be an initial orientation to not expanding the road and creating more traffic or more activity in it. But there are certain roads that need better solutions, and so I think at the end of the day, you'll see communities wanting to hold on to the existing roads in terms of the dimensions, keeping those roads maintained and safe. And then you'll find some others with hybrid solutions that may want to do both an improvement and make it safer, make it wider in certain areas, provide off-road parking in certain areas. But again, in our commitment and in the spirit of DMAPS, there is no one blanket answer to that question because it really belongs to a community debate and discussion. I will tell you that when it hit 10,400,000, you know, immediately I would talk to people in the course of 1 week. I could talk to somebody that said, John, we got to cap it at 6 million. And then 4 days later, I could be at a lunch talking to someone who thinks we can do 12 million, right? Now, these are difficult questions to answer, and it's a very delicate balance, and I'm less focused on the number at the moment. But let's take the scenario of 6 million, right? That would require us to like shut tourism like every August and reopen in January, right? Unless we've developed the systems to better channelize the flow of visitors using technology, using better public policy, and using creative programs, right? So, and the other thing I would add is, while it feels like an easy solution to just cap it from 10 million forward to 6 million, if you feel that strongly about the 6 million, then you got to help us understand where the other 800 million in state tax revenue is going to come from. And finish that thought, finish the paragraph, and not just get preoccupied with the maximum number of people that you perceive would be best. So I hope that answered the question in part. Thanks, Stuart.
Stuart, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, this is Carl Kim. I'm an urban planning professor at the University of Hawaii. This was a really great session, very, very informative, and it reminds us that great places to visit are first great places to live. My question really deals with the details of how we plan and design communities to be both great places to live and also great places to visit. What do you all think about mixed use? You know, in the past, we tried to, with zoning, we tried to separate industrial uses. And the visitor industry was really seen as almost like an industrial activity. And so now, increasingly, we're seeing much more mixed use, mixing of residential and visitor accommodations, mixing of services and businesses that support both visitors and the community. I think there are real challenges in actually planning and designing effective mixed-use communities. And I wonder if the panelists could comment on that, because I think it's those activities that drive the transportation, that drives where people live and how people move around in a community.
Yeah, I'll take first crack at that. At least at Tahoe, our entire kind of urban footprint was really built out in the 60s and 70s before there were any rule. There wasn't even zoning at that point. It was sort of the wild, wild west. So we've spent the last 60, 65 years trying to fix that. And one of our solutions is compact mixed use development, move the outer limits of our development, the sporadic sprawl that we had, put them into those closer town centers, like you said, where we have recreation, we have workspace, we have shopping, we have all those connections. So that's something that we really are actively promoting. But there are, as you also noted, you know, balances that need to be taken into place in terms of preserving the quality of life for residents. And, you know, vacation rentals and short-term rentals are probably the spear tip, the point of that spear tip in terms of the potential incompatibilities of uses within residential neighborhoods. And that's something that the communities around our lake are struggling with and testing out different solutions in order to find that balance. But I think it's also important to realize that as Tahoe is a great place to visit and a great place to live, it's not just our tourists that enjoy the outdoors and enjoy the recreation amenities. It's the locals that take just as much of an advantage of those amenities. So by creating those mixed use opportunities that connect to recreation, I think one way to look at it is less of visitor serving and more of quality of life serving. And I think you can share the benefits of helping your tourism industry be more sustainable, be a better economic driver, but at the same time, show those benefits to the residents and say, hey, yes, tourists are going to enjoy this, but so can you.
For state parks, this is a little bit of a different question for us because not very many of our park units are integrated into highly urbanized areas, but we do have some that are. And there in your hat behind you is, I think I need one of these that says YIMBY, which is yes in my backyard, I believe. We deal with a lot of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And you got a lot of residents that have property that is right there with our public lands. And there's always that concern of how it's going to impact their way of life. But in short, for mixed use, I feel that of the park units that we do have that are in very urbanized areas or within reach of very urbanized areas, they're really used like regional parks. And it provides great access, and if you have residents and commerce and the parks all kind of together, you've got more transportation opportunities when it comes to non-motorized transportation. You've got more opportunities for folks who might not have the best, living in the nicest neighborhoods, have more access to these facilities and these recreation opportunities. Sometimes you see when you have such separated areas, zoning areas, a lot of times the lower income ends up over by the commercial and they don't get to benefit as much from these nicely designed neighborhoods. So I think mixed use is beneficial, but I agree there's a lot of conflict that has to be resolved when you have mixed use, definitely. But I see it's beneficial. I think you have more business, commerce happening. You're going to have more higher economy in those areas and just more options for the people who are living in those spaces.
I would add, thank you for that question. And I wish we had more time to drill in greater detail, but I, for one, am in favor of mixed use development and planning. I come out of a residential real estate development background as well, and understand when that's implemented effectively and well designed, you can get the kinds of results you want. Perhaps, a case study that is still underway is Kaka'ako. And I can remember, the mantra at Kaka'ako is live, work, play. And it's still kind of a question in my mind as to whether we've been able to achieve that in a way that is mutually beneficial to the resident population, as well as the high-end investor that is acquiring some of the accommodations there. So, and I'm not criticizing Kaka'ako in the least. I happen to enjoy it, but I do think that creating a well-integrated community that has community, culture, and commerce is ultimately where we should be headed. And from the visitor experience, we can see early indications of markets or market segments that are arcing back toward more authentic experiences and more meaning in what they're doing. And frankly, I have this concept that rather than going to a luau for 3,000 people in some big area, I would love to see local families who are trained, certified, and prepared to do a luau in their home for a maximum of 10 people and charge $300 a person and have a second revenue stream derived. If you can scale that to 300, 500 statewide, you're going to end up with a whole bunch of people enjoying great food, great entertainment, cultural storytelling, and that's the kind of authentic engagement that I believe the industry has potential to get there and could be very much part of a mixed use application. So thank you for that.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Alexandra and Devin. And I believe the people at UH have unmuted everybody. So if you'd like to ask a speaker, Alexandra, John, or Devin directly, you can do that. I did want to say that probably in about 15 minutes, the next session will begin. So I wanted to throw that out before we go into more questions. Does anybody have more questions? Here we go.
Actually, it's not a question. I really like John's approach to enabling people to participate in both personalized opportunities as well as also making really an authentic and forming bridges. People are able to participate in the lives of the people of the neighborhoods and the society that they come in contact with, and it also probably solves a lot of the travel needs, because having 3,000 people in one place actually creates a lot of challenges in terms of travel needs. Even if there are buses and stuff like that that are taking them, it's still a lot of activity in just one area that could impact many other things. But having this economic opportunity and cultural engagement from a wider people, and not concentrating in mega businesses that are not really in many ways may not be in touch with what happens at the local population. We are seeing growth of through the closures and stuff like that. Growth
Asa,
of,
do you have a question?
do I have a question? No, I just have a comment, and I appreciate John's view and being able to do decentralized activities that will help the transportation and other areas and empower people. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Lazarus, and I'm currently employed with Caltrans in the Division of Maintenance. And I had a fairly general question for everyone in the meeting. Do we have any target dates of completion set for any of these projects or any of these ideas that have been shared today?
So for state parks, we're in the process of finalizing our implementation plan for the path forward. That's to be launched in the summer. And then we have 5 years to implement nearly, we have 5 years to kind of sort and implement quite a few projects that help meet those goals. For EV station, that we're looking at by April 2023 for the first round of EV stations. And for some of our past programs, we're implementing here in the next few months. We've got the library program in April, and then we've already implemented the fourth grader adventure pass program, and we're in the process of working on the CalWorks here in the next few months to get that implemented. Try to think of any of the programs I mentioned, if that's what you're looking for.
And I would add,
that was.
I'm sorry, Sarah. I would add that our destination management action plans have specific outcomes identified for each year for 3 years, and so it is a schedule of completion that is embedded in the plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Devin?
Yeah, I don't have necessarily a specific project to talk about timeline, but we are constantly looking at a 25-year scale and updating our plans every 3 to 4 years. So we're we're constantly moving through the phases of plan, implement, check, monitor, check, adjust. Like we're constantly on that cycle of implementing, coming up with new ideas. We're never really emptying our plate up here. We're always adding more stuff to it.
Definitely. Now, the second part to my question is, what can members of the Division of Maintenance here, particularly in California, do to help move us all forward towards these goals that have been set and to help achieve these ideas that have been shared? Because maintenance really plays a big part in all of this. And I want to know specifically what we can do to help and to really further these goals.
Thank you, Sarah. You know, for California's side, you know, the opportunity to work with Caltrans is always beneficial. When we're talking about our sea level rise adaptation strategies, you know, that affects the obviously the roadways along the coast, and has and you're a big partner with how we move forward with some of those. So I think partnering with us, you know, and joining us in some of our stakeholder and advisory committee type meetings when we're working on some of these specific projects is always beneficial. I'd happily reach out to you, or you know, if I can get your address, you're welcome to contact me and work out ways that we can continue the conversation.
Definitely, that would be great. Thank you all very much.
This is Stuart. Let's see, another question?
Yeah, if I can. Hi, presenters. So Professor Kim, and also in your presentations, you guys had shown that the communities have, you know, various reactions to the to the tourism, the visitors that are coming in. And just to tag on to what Professor Kim was saying, you know, there is also an education, you know, John, you were talking about, you know, Malama and how we can teach aloha, or at least bring aloha into these spaces. And so I just wondered, how are you guys communicating those intentions, not only with the communities that live there, because obviously these are places where people live, but to the tourists themselves, and how can we educate them? Because I feel like, along with the signs, you know, that you're showing, is that the community right now bears a lot of that burden. And do you believe that that responsibility needs to be legislative? There needs to be action on how we treat visitors, narrowing that flow, like you were saying, John, or, you know, is there a balance between the community education side on how people talk to one another, and also how tourism as an agency, you know, interacts with those people or those visitors?
Oh, excellent question. Thank you. You know, there was a time, we all remember it, when you had a captive audience in a jet and everybody was looking at the same screen, right? And so you could control the messaging that way, and people could either fall asleep or pay attention to it, right? Today, there are multimedia platforms, and so we're having to find our way in messaging pre-arrival, right? Before they even think about coming to Hawaii. Once they book their trip to Hawaii, once they get their air reservations, right? And so every step of the way with our travel partners, we have created a library of informative, typically video clips, print media, that we can use to insert that, because trying to educate, trying to inform, and trying to have the visitor pre-arrival understand the ways of the islands and being more sensitive to it is an important part of our messaging. And you will find the Malama message permeating what we're doing right now, because that is a consciousness that we are committed to for the duration. 90 years ago, somebody said that Hawaiian cultural value was going to be aloha. And so today, Hawaii is synonymous with the aloha state. And what we're doing is now pairing Malama as the sister cultural value, to protect, to care for, to nurture. Those are the kinds of things we do for the things we love the most. So Malama and aloha to me are like sister values that will become are becoming staples in how we present this to the world. And the other thing I would say is it's dangerous to me, I'm concerned about it, to be telling the visitor one story and the resident something else. And so what we're striving for is a message that over time is universal and can be applied to us because it is actually speaking to our humanity. And in that sense, Hawaiian cultural values have a universal application, as we move forward. So it's how I believe my ancestors wanted it to be. That's certainly the way my grandparents raised me, and that it was very inclusive and therefore belonged to humanity, not just to Hawaiians.
Yeah, John, you bring up a really good point in terms of the message for the locals versus the visitors. And that's something we really try to have be self-reinforcing at Tahoe, is if the locals and the residents get the message about why you shouldn't litter and why it's important to protect the lake and why you should ride your bike or take the bus instead of drive, like those locals are also your frontline points of contact with the visitors. They're the locals that are at the gas stations, they're at the restaurants, they're at the hotel reception. So if you're reaching your locals and getting them bought into the message, they're able to interact and share that in multiple touch points with the visitors. And I'm constantly talking about, as an example of building that spirit, what you all do in Hawaii. When you get off that plane as a visitor, the first thing you get when you leave that airport is that lei around your neck. And it's like you've arrived. It's that signal, it's that physical thing that you do to put visitors in that mindset. And then if you can back it up with that messaging to go beyond, as John said, it's not just about aloha, it's that next step. I think that is a really successful strategy. But it also takes constant upkeep on that. You constantly keep out. You can't tell people once and then go away. It's constantly talking about it.
Thank you, Devin and John.
Thank you.
Let's see. I'm going to have one more question, then we're going to have to break because the next sessions will be happening. And this one is for Devin. And thank you, Alexandra. She's going to be heading out. Tahoe seems to have a great direction of channeling visitors using transportation options. For example, buses that take people to popular destinations. Is HTA involved in plans to use transit and multimodal transportation both for residents and visitors, especially on neighbor islands? Actually, this is for John, I guess.
Yes, the rude awakening, if you will, came when visitors started to return and we had a void of rent-a-car fleets, right? And so we had to manage certain number of visitors on every island that needed transportation from the airport. So I would say that right now, each of the islands is looking at a much more comprehensive ground transportation system. Throughout the DMAP process on every island, one of the recurring themes was traffic congestion and the number of rent-a-cars that were contributing to the local traffic as well. And this is causing each of the counties to take a serious look at how to evolve a more efficient public transportation system that would give the visitor and the resident public transportation options that don't currently exist. So it is a complex work under progress. Thanks, Stuart.
This is Stuart. Thank you, everybody, especially our speakers. And for the audience, we're going to have to break right now. We will be recording these sessions, and as well as people have the contact information for our wonderful speakers. Thank you again, and hope to see everybody soon. Goodbye.